Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. I'm your host, Marty Bennett, and today, July 7th, 2021, we're going to be asking 3 questions and answering them that we've been hearing from international educators the past week. First up, what do students want this fall? Second, can you over-communicate your vaccine policy? And third, how are UK universities responding to aggregators? We'll talk about these 3 questions and more in just a minute. Before we do, want to say obviously a special shout out to those that are watching live here on Facebook every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. It's always a pleasure to be coming to you as part of your work week. And every day we talk about the differences in our international education approaches in the United States compared to other countries, and we're certainly going to be one that we'll be sharing with you in the coming days and weeks as we look to talk about what's happening in our wider world. So we appreciate you being here for this week's edition of the Midweek Roundup. And we're going to start with a question that seems a little bit simple, but it's certainly one that is important as we answer the questions that we see boiling up all over, really. And in terms of what we see as important issues in prospective students' lives as they are looking to make that important decision related to where they're going to study in the coming days and weeks. They're looking to join in and be a part of institutions around the world for their first live experience studying in person. And we're really at a point in the pandemic where we're seeing a lot of challenges, frankly, to institutions that are having issues with regards to how they're managing the crisis of COVID-19 on their campuses. We're also seeing a variety of different challenges that you're seeing on your own campuses related to vaccination policies. So it's important at this point to really pause and take a look at what students are actually asking for or expecting in the coming days and weeks as they make their arrangements to come to campus this fall. So, a couple of surveys that we'll be touching on briefly today. First is one by Into Partnerships. They have surveyed 625 students across 80 countries, students that were going to be coming for study in the fall. Those were bound for the U.S. actually had the most positive outlook on their study plans for the fall term. With 63% showing that were most positive about their future related to their study. Why is that? Because they were vast majority, 90% of U.S. colleges are planning to be in person this fall, and that makes an important difference in international students' preferences for where they want to be and how they want to study. So the UK and US did seem to be the 2 destinations that were the most positive for currently in the pipeline students for study. And if you'd like to get more information on this article that I'm referencing, as with all the pieces of news that we cover, we've dropped the links into the comments section on the Facebook page for SMIE Consulting that you're watching now live. If you're watching on repeat on YouTube, you can get the link to the Facebook page to get those news stories that we cover. But you can also get that through our SMIE Consulting newsletter called All the SMIE News Fit to Share. And that comes out Mondays at 9 a.m. Eastern. You can go to smieconsulting.org/subscribe to subscribe to the newsletter and also see all past editions of our news that we share main themes with here on Wednesdays. So aside from this Into Partnerships survey, what I think is important to keep in mind with any student survey is take a look at what when they ask the question, what are they most looking forward to? What's the reasons for motivations for studying abroad? Those kinds of questions, because that matters. That matters because it's a cue to you to make sure and go through your comm plans and find out, are we sending out the right messages to meet the needs of what students' expectations are? And from this survey, the 4 pieces of information that they cited most highly what their higher education experience is going to do for them. First, boosting career prospects, 75%. So outcomes matter. Do you have information that you're profiling through your comm plan about career prospects for your graduates, international graduates in particular? Where can they potentially do internships, work experiences, and where do they get jobs after graduation? Are you tracking that? They want to know that, and they want to know that they're going to be their chances of getting that job that they're hoping for will be enhanced because of their experience on your campus. Next up, they're looking for high quality instruction. So obviously most all institutions talk about that in some way or another, but is that front and center for your prospective students from overseas? Intercultural exchange at 62%, and then engaging with students from across the world also at 62%. So those were the 4 clear, far and away winners in terms of what students are prioritizing and are expecting from their experiences. So I think it's going to be important as you look to your comm plans for this last stretch before students arrive, if those have been emphasized in the previous few months that you've been sending out messages to these students. And also, it's a good reset for the coming year if you don't have those already part of your plan to connect with your prospective audiences. So good insight from that Into survey in terms of student preferences. There's also one from QS. QS, as you know, connected to the world rankings. They have their own world rankings that they produce yearly, but they also do ongoing reports on student preferences for studying overseas. And this one is they have a monthly report that they put out, and this one that I'm dropping the link to on the Facebook page does cover a lot of you fill this form out, you'll get the report link. So that's a good place to start. I'll also be putting my copy of that report in the comments as well. And the highlights I really want to stress, and there's data on in this survey about the impacts, how effective higher education institutions have been in managing the return to study during this phase of the pandemic, getting student impacts on that. It's also, this survey does look at currently enrolled students who are not yet in country, what their perspectives are on the various issues involved. So there's some decent data in here that gives you a mix of what current and prospective students are doing. It talks about what campuses have done to, and this is not just U.S., this is global, what campuses have done to limit the spread of coronavirus on campus in the past year in terms of online education, masking, and all of that type of thing. But what I think is important in this particular survey that I want to emphasize are some of the data points regarding when return to face-to-face education this fall, as also on the impact of vaccines and how well these plans are communicated, whether they even make a difference in their study abroad plans. The lion's share of students that were surveyed for this through the QS report say that it hasn't made any difference to my educational plans, 42%. 16% have said the vaccine makes them want to start their studies later. And 22% are undecided. 21% says that it has accelerated their plans to want to study earlier. So most of just having the fact that there is a vaccine available doesn't necessarily make or break a student's decision to want to attend your institution. The question, interestingly, of do you think universities should require students to have the vaccine before they can travel? 59%, say yes, that universities should require that. Another similar question: do you think travel vaccine passports should be required before you can travel? There's some interesting data here, but the U.S., as we know, doesn't have a vaccination requirement for coming into the United States. Just a negative COVID test 3 days before you arrive. So what is important about the vaccine, and I think we know certainly in the U.S. that being vaccinated has become a very political issue. Anti-vaxxers are out there that who are against vaccines in general are even more so vocal about their opposition to a vaccine that's approved for emergency use only. The vaccines that are required for students to attend elementary and middle and high schools are ones that are approved for regular use. The ones for measles, mumps, and rubella, for TB, for tetanus shots you need to get, other vaccinations you need to have had. Those are all approved for regular use. There's even in the QS survey, there's some data there that indicates that students are still a little bit concerned. In some countries, some students that were quoted in this survey results show that they are worried about an emergency use vaccine, and there's not enough data yet, and how can it be trusted? And so there's legitimacy on both sides of the issue here. But what I think is important to keep in mind is that not students, international students, are not always going to be in the camp of, yes, I want to have a vaccine, even though you may be requiring it. Some campuses may be putting off prospective international students if they know that they're going to have a vaccine in order to attend. So that's just an area of concern, because I know a lot of the press, certainly in the U.S., has been all over the fact that these 500 plus schools now, which has been pretty much the same for the last month, it hasn't really improved or increased significantly, that there have been so many institutions that are really it's been in the news that everybody's requiring vaccinations now for students to start study. I've talked at length on this roundup about how that is potentially troubling for international students that don't have access to a vaccine before they arrive, and that's even if they do have access to a vaccine, it might not be the right one, depending on where your institution's stance is on requiring which kind of vaccines, the FDA, CDC approved or the WHO approved. What happens if they don't have either of those two, like the Russian Sputnik vaccine, and a couple of others that are locally produced that aren't on these approved lists yet. And again, all these approvals have just been for emergency use only, not regular use. So it's going to be interesting to follow this as the discussions continue. We'll talk in our next question here. Can you over-communicate your vaccine policy? Obviously, it's related. And even the most prestigious institutions who have made decisions, like, for example, Harvard and many of the Ivies now are going to be requiring vaccinations for incoming students. Their policy is, yes, it's going to be required, and they do make exceptions or do allow for WHO and Food and Drug Administration approved vaccines. That's in order to live on campus. So that's their policy. Harvard will require that all students receive a COVID-19 vaccination authorized by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration or WHO in order to live on campus next semester. So because of many other countries have not had the fast rollouts of vaccines like we have had in the U.S., there are international students that are quoted in this Harvard Crimson article saying that they have real questions about what I'm not going to be able to get one before I arrive. How am I supposed to get one? And that they really haven't, the university hasn't updated their websites. They might have sent emails out, but the websites haven't, they may need to quarantine, or there are other concerns that are important here, testing, masking, all these other things that they're going to want to find out about. So one student felt he was going to need to quarantine upon arrival based on previous university communication to international students. So that's a real concern. If that's what a student has thought has been communicated, but that's not the case, is something that you really want to make sure that you're communicating well and consistently across the board. And that this is the real challenge, isn't it? It's the time in the year when, during the summer, where everybody's kind of getting ready for new students to arrive, but you're also struggling with the kinds of procedural changes. Last year it was whether you're going to be in person, hybrid, or fully online. This year it's a combination of that, which though most are going to be fully in person, there may be still some hybrid courses. Will that impact new students' ability to come into the country? How have you communicated that? And the vaccine policy, the testing policy, the masking policy. How have you communicated those things? Quarantining. How have you communicated these steps to your new students? Has it been one email that was sent out with all that information? Or has this been sent out through email on your website and social media and maybe live chats, pre-departure orientations? How have you been covering this very essential topic in your communication with your incoming students? You cannot over-communicate it in terms of what your policies are right now for vaccines, testing, quarantining, masking, all of these things. They need to know modality of study for the fall. All of that needs to be front and center in almost every communication you have with your incoming students, so you eliminate that confusion. Because if all students go off is what they see in the news in their home countries about what's being planned in the United States, or vaccine policies, or visa at consulates, you might think that they're never going to get a visa appointment, and you might think that everybody's going to require a vaccine. If you don't have one before you leave, you're not going to be able to enter the U.S. But right now, the only travel requirement related to COVID is you got to get tested 3 days before you come, and it's got to be negative to get on a plane to come to the U.S. That's right now the only travel restriction that exists. If there are any changes, you certainly need to be front and center and make sure you're on top of that as soon as it happens, so that you can communicate and update your incoming students about what any changes to that policy will be. So from the Harvard example, it's clear that there are some students that just aren't really understanding all the changes that are going on. And I think the next article we have from Politico certainly reflects those changes as well, that are confusing, frankly, for international students. And it's called How Vaccines Could Cause Trouble for International Students. And it's put together by people from Penn State, University of Pittsburgh, and the AAU, Association of American Universities. And it really focuses on, well, okay, we're returning to campus this fall. 90% of colleges are going to be in person. It talks about the vaccines that are going to be required at 500 colleges. But remember, there's 4,500 colleges in the U.S. That's 12% of our U.S. colleges are requiring a vaccine. So the vast majority are not. So, but the students, if that's all they hear is that news about 500 colleges, they think, oh my gosh, all U.S. colleges are requiring vaccines. So this, which vaccines you will accept is going to be an important distinction you need to make. Will you accept only WHO and FDA, or any vaccination? Like the folks at NYU and Carnegie Mellon, they're saying that if they've got vaccinations for any vaccine, they will accept that. But that's an important thing that you need to be clear with your students about, what the policy actually is. No matter what it is, make sure it's clear, and make sure it's communicated, and make sure it's done on multiple channels at multiple times over the next few days and weeks before they get on a plane to come to you. As you want to eliminate as much confusion and take out as much stress in this process as you can to make that student feel more comfortable about their decision to come to your campus for study. So this is an important one. Certainly we all need to be paying attention to. And when you think about over-communicating, when you have, in the case of Arizona, public institutions in Arizona, they are now prohibited from making any masking, vaccination, COVID testing requirements for students while they're on campus, which poses some interesting challenges for those campuses in terms of what the expectations they will be able to provide students in terms of those three items, masking, testing, and vaccinations in terms of requirements. So we'll be interested to see how this public institutions in Arizona respond to this. We've seen some other issues in Indiana with public institutions being prohibited from requiring a vaccination, but in schools like Indiana University that we talked about last week, saying that if you're not vaccinated, you can't be on campus. You can't even be employed at IU if you're not, unless you fall into the medical or religious exemptions that exist there. And if you're not in one of those, you're out of luck at that school, which is interesting because it is a very popular destination for international students in the top 20. So it's going to be interesting moving forward what campuses will do. And the key is whatever your policy is, make sure a student can recite it back to you by the time they get to campus, because you want to have made that impression very clear as to what the expectation is, because it will make a difference in how effective you are in your ability to enroll these students this coming fall term. Last piece in the puzzle for this before we move on to our final question of the day, and that has to do with regard to an article from the Pi News entitled "Stakeholders Call for Clear Communications on U.S. University Vaccine Requirements." Why? Because you can't say it enough. Because if students only listen to what they see in the news, they're going to get one message. If they're hearing that, then they hear your message, which may be very different, particularly if you're not requiring a vaccine. You want to make sure that your policy is clear, that you're, again, making that point over and over again. And the people that they're interviewing for this one, it's folks at ACE, American Council on Education. It's folks from the North American Association of Indian Students. And that's some people who are obviously thinking about this. And you think about accessibility to vaccines. It's a big driver for students if they know that they don't have to worry about it, trying to find one in country where they might not be very accessible. And there may be people many months ahead of them in the line for a vaccine in their home country. If they know that you're going to provide those vaccines and they want them, and it's not required, but they can get one, that may be a great source of comfort for them. And Alan Goodman, in one of the previous articles, makes that point, that this is an opportunity for the U.S. universities to provide kind of vaccine diplomacy for in American higher education, in terms of showing that, hey, we understand it's a need. You might not have it in your country for many months or a year to be able to get a vaccine if you weren't leaving the country. We want you to know that if you want one and you're here in the U.S., you can get one. And that's a real coup, I think, if we're thinking about it through that lens of what the student's thinking. The student that is maybe cautious, they've lost loved ones to COVID-19, they want to get vaccinated. That's a real important piece of the puzzle for them that will give them peace of mind, give their parents peace of mind, other relatives peace of mind. But that's something that your policies, whatever it may be on your campus, should be communicated and should have already been communicated in various ways to those incoming students that you're expecting to enroll in the coming 6 weeks to a month or 2 months. So let's think about how you do that, and through social media, through live chats, through pre-departure orientations, through email messaging, and combinations of all of those is an important part, and your website. No student should come to you this fall to enroll that doesn't know what your policy is. And that's something that you really need to hammer home with every conversation, every message, every post that is related to incoming student requirements. This is what you need to be focusing on. Last year was a whole different set of issues. This year, vaccinations are going to be top of the list, and other related topics to their enrollment in the coming fall. Will they need to quarantine? Will they need to regular testing, even if they are vaccinated? What are those policies going to be? Because you'd rather tell them this information in advance, be as clear as possible with them, with your policy, before they take the time to get on that plane and to come to you. So we'll talk more about these very important issues in the coming days and weeks, but clear communications, again, can't be overemphasized at this important time in the admissions cycle. Now let's shift gears and get to our last question. How are UK universities responding to aggregators? And this is important here. We've talked about what an agent aggregator is on the podcast, on the Roundup here for the last 3 or 4 months. So hopefully we don't have to rehash that now. But what we're talking about with aggregators there's different kinds. There are the more traditional aggregators, which are the pathway providers that have networks of agents in different countries that help recruit students for different institutions that they have pathway programs on. Before that, there's groups like IDP, IDP is probably the oldest agent network in the world. They've been around since the mid-80s, recruiting initially for Australian universities, but are now doing that for Australian, British, Canadian, New Zealand, and U.S. institutions. So that's something that's and they provide obviously boots on the ground in a number of different countries, 32 countries I think it is now for IDP. Other aggregators may have larger agent pools, and that would be the newest wave of agent aggregators, which are the EdTech platforms, the Adventus, the Apply Board, the Dream Apply, Educo. Those are the ones that have been coming up recently that have gotten venture capital investment to bolster their startup costs, that have enrolled hundreds, if not thousands, of agents from around the world to direct their students to this platform. And this platform will have profiles in different countries where these aggregator platforms have signed up institutions in the US, in the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, wherever it might be. These institutions that the aggregators have on their platforms are the targets for the students that are being directed to by the agents that are signed up with these aggregators. So they play the middleman. They do all the payments to the agents. You have obviously your sign-on fees for working with an institution and are working with an aggregator platform, or depending on what it is, per student cost, whatever it might be. But the institute, they pay the agents directly. You don't really deal with the agents. So that's been a major concern typically as to whether these aggregators allow the transparency that universities that are working with agents now expect to have in terms of how their messages are translated to students in different markets. You get the issues of, well, how do we know who these agents are in the first place? You really don't have that with these platform-based EdTech aggregators. So there's a lot of a distinct feeling of a lack of control in a lot of institutions' eyes. So the reason I bring this topic up and ask it is, well, it's important to know how aggregators are not just for the U.S. They are global. Agents recruit students to go to many destination countries. And we've talking about what aggregators are, you see a lot of these companies that might be based in, like Plyboard is based in Canadian or company. Adventus is an Australian company. Others are, Educo is an Australian company. Others as well that have the certainly multinational purpose. And the Student Apply is another as well. Catalyst, GEM, that really, again, take away and provide a completely online space where students can find universities and can then hopefully enroll. So find the ones that are good fits and all of those interesting dynamics that must occur during the attraction of students to institutions. So the partners in the UK, for example, universities that have been working with agents for many years, I've recently done a survey through their UK EAS survey that shows that many of the UK higher ed folks are already using these platforms, these aggregator platforms. They have worked with agents for many years, but now they are going with these bigger platforms to help expand their pool, so to speak. And out of 100 responses from UK universities, 53.4% said that they would they currently work with aggregator platforms, compared to 28.2% who say they do not. That survey also said that 3%, only 3% of institutions will not consider working with aggregators, primarily because of that a lack of transparency and control that they have over message and institution and who these agents are that are promoting their brands. So there are a lot of different aggregators out there in the market now. They're bombarding university reps with their business pitches for their platforms, and they all sound great, and they will vary slightly from one to the other. But there's the folks that are responding do have some concerns that there is a lack of control. They're too commercially driven was one of the barriers, a potential barrier to signing on with aggregator platforms. So we'll see where that goes. If that's just a recency bias, that because it's a newer phenomenon, they don't want to trust it yet because they don't know how it all operates. We may see changes in those attitudes, but as for now, aggregators are here to stay in the UK. They're making their presence felt in Canada and Australia, New Zealand, and here in the US. Probably the last great frontier for them in terms of the English-speaking world. But we'll see where those go. We'll see what the future holds for these platforms, but we'll certainly have more on that in the coming weeks and months. Last thought for the day, for those of you who are world football fans, you know, and who know me, you know my heritage, being born in England. Later today at 3 p.m. Eastern, big day for England, chance to make it to the Euro 2020 finals. Prediction for the game will be a 3-0 victory for the English. Sorry to my Danish colleagues, but you've had a great run and an inspirational one at that. And we'll be looking forward to a final on Sunday between England and Italy. So until next time, we wish you the very best and look forward to future conversations. Have a great day.